Hi. Hi, Ishan.
Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Hey. Good morning and welcome to day 4 of the Future of Creativity. I'm Alex Jardine, Associate Creativity Editor in London at Ad Age, and here's my colleague Ishan, who is also Associate Creativity Editor in New York.
Here we are, day 4, the final day of the Future of Creativity Week. We've had a lot of good panels thus far, though. Yesterday we kicked it off with some great information about freelancing from Kathy Heppenstall-Parks, who has been a longtime freelancer at a bunch of different agencies. And then a really great conversation with Justin Genak from Working Not Working.
Yeah, and then Ishan, you hosted a really amazing roundtable on diversity and inclusion that threw up some really interesting insights.
Yeah, we had a nice conversation with Ryan Ford from Kashmir, Christina Pyle from Time's Up, and Brianna Patrick from Goodby Silverstein and Partners. And then you had a conversation with McCann and MasterCard.
Yeah, I had a great chat with MasterCard about their True Name campaign, which, if you're not familiar, it's where they made it possible for transgender people to put their new name onto their credit card, which was just so helpful for those people. So if you haven't watched those, you can go back and watch them again. In the meantime, we are moving on today, and the title of this week is The Future of Creativity, and today it really is about the future. It's all about celebrating the young talent. So we have our Young Creatives Roundtable featuring the young talent in the industry behind the winning work from brands like Popeyes and HBO, Sandy Hook, Promise and Thinks as well. And we'll also be talking to them about the other issues like diversity and leadership, as well as their work. Then later on this morning, well, you say what you're doing. You're hosting another session.
Talking with Twitter about engaging Black voices. And then this afternoon, we've got the results of the Young Creatives cover contest.
Yeah, and I hope everyone's going to tune in and take a look at those incredible finalists there. There's some really, really cool designs in there on the theme of how creativity has fueled our industry during the pandemic.
Okay. All right. Well, Alex, I'll let you get to it, and I'll see you later.
See you later. Okay, before we start, I just want to thank our sponsors, our presenting sponsor, Verizon Media, and our supporting sponsors, the Ad Council, the Female Quotient, the It Gets Better Project, and the Miami Ad School. And now let's welcome our young creatives. We have followed the winning work this year to find the most incredible young talent, and we've got a great lineup today. We have Angela Brown and Randy Romero, who are social strategists at GSD&M, and they worked on the Popeyes chicken sandwich campaign that saw a 2-word tweet go seriously viral. And we have Bianca Guimarães. Hey, Bianca.
Hello.
Who is SVP Creative Director from BBDO New York, and her work has included the menstruation campaign for Thinks and Sandy Hook Promise's latest Back to School ad, which is really powerful. So welcome to Bianca. And we have Lauren Ferreira who is Creative Director at Droga 5. And Lauren's work includes the HBO For the Throne campaign. And she also won Ad Age's Creative of the Year award on Monday night. So congratulations on that.
Thanks so much. Hi, guys.
Hi. Okay, so we're going to start out taking a look at some of the work that's helped you all break through as young creative leaders. And I'm going to kick off with Angela and Randy. Your work for Popeyes won a couple of awards the other night. They won the Tiny But Mighty and the Launch of the Year awards at the Creativity Awards. And they were also finalists in the People category. And I don't know if anyone's noticed, but the story about their work has been the top story on adage.com for the whole of this week. So that just goes to show how popular this work is. They were the social strategy campaign behind the tweet that was heard all around the world. If you're not familiar, Popeyes had launched its chicken sandwich and its rival, Chick-fil-A, was getting a little insecure. So it put out a tweet that seemed to be kind of mocking Popeyes for jumping on the bandwagon. And it was Popeye's response that really sent the internet crazy. I can't really do a New Orleans accent, so maybe you can say it properly later, but essentially it's, y'all good?
That was not bad. That was not bad. That was not bad.
Okay, so can you tell us a bit more about how it came about and how that tweet actually happened?
For sure, yeah. I'll start, and Angela, feel free to jump in. But we've been working on that campaign for months. I think it was around 6 months. And before then, we were tasked with completely just revamping the Popeyes social strategy as a whole. And as we all know, listeners on the stream, but also here on the panel, when you're tasked to do a complete kind of rebrand for a social campaign, it takes a lot of time and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to just figure out how do we authentically show ourselves on social media. But I think one thing that really led to the 2-word tweet and just the kind of viral nature of the chicken sandwich was us really understanding, aligning, and educating with our clients really about an audience on social media that tends not really to be highlighted or spotlighted for brands, and that's Black Twitter. So I do remember back in late 2018, early 2019, sitting in a room with our clients and just kind of talking to them about this audience called Black Twitter that not only do they just have a lot of love for the brand naturally, and they're just automatically talking about things about the brand that we don't even see typically on a lot of our other clients. But one thing that we were really surprised by and motivated by to really elevate their voices was that they're amazing creators, on Twitter especially. So for us, the 2-word tweet was great, but I think a lot of the work led up to just being able to educate our clients about this audience and really connect with them in a way that feels authentic and not a brand jumping on just another viral moment or jumping on another hashtag trend, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this campaign is really about how you give a brand a really strong voice on social. So have you got any advice for people on that? Because it's something that, a lot of brands still get wrong.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So kind of just to piggyback off what Brandy was talking about, like the reason the voice was able to be what it was is because of the nature and the origin of the Popeyes brand. They're in New Orleans, it's Southern. So there's that accent, there's that y'all good, like that's, what it sounds like. And that's kind of the advantage that the brand has, is the authenticity comes through because of where they were created. And Black culture really is very strong. It pretty much is, Louisiana, it is New Orleans. So, that was us having to really understand like the audience that really rode for the brand. And we had to educate from the top down, right? Like some people that we worked with didn't even know what Black Twitter was or knew anything about it. And so we had to explain, how powerful that audience is and how they move and shake and create and shift and, cause things to blow up in the best way when it comes to brands and just really amazing moments on social media. But, we kind of had to figure out like, okay, if we're based in New Orleans, we have this Southern accent, like here's how we would talk. It wasn't about trying to take any kind of like AAVE, which is African-American Vernacular English, but it was about understanding like what the brand is able to do and who they're able to speak to, and really aligning with helping them understand who the audience truly was, and understanding like that we did research, right? So we pulled a lot of data looking at the audience that interacted with the brand, looking at the people who went to the store and bought their food, but then also understanding they wanted to reach a younger audience. And so, how do you do that? How do you relate to them? And really just making sure that we were engaging with all of the people that would, mention the brand or tag the brand, and explain to our clients why we would want to engage and what moments were important for us to engage.
And did the impact that tweet had, did that surprise you? Did that take you by surprise? Just how big
we knew, we kind of knew at a point that like we were going to
ruffle some feathers. We didn't know to the extent, obviously, of what it was going to do, but we've been, talking with our clients about moments like these, moments where you can take risks, but also we knew that we've built by that time a really kind of big audience of just Popeyes fans on social. So we knew that we had a core group of fans that would just ride for us, even if, Chick-fil-A's fans came for us. And it was a risk that our clients took. So that was something that we were super happy that they said yes to. Looking back, probably late 2018, early 2019, I don't think they would have done that. But just showing them, that you can take these calculated risks, showing them through the data that, our engagement was rising because we were engaging in authentic ways, and we were speaking to our audience in ways that they understood, whether it was a trend that was adjacent to our brand or something that was inherently about the Popeyes brand, for example, like their biscuits or whatnot. So yeah, we knew we were going to create a wave, but we didn't know how big, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to add something. I'll add something to that, just because when Randy and I, when we did the tweet, I remember we left our cube, because we shared a cube working on this brand at work, and we had run into our boss in the hallway, and we were just excited that the client was cool with a competitive tweet. But we had went into a meeting, I remember, and we saw the numbers rising for retweets and mentions and comments, and we were like, oh, okay, we did something. We had no idea the impact, or that Black Twitter was going to take this thing and just run with it in the most incredible ways. So yeah, we to Randy's point, we knew it was going to do something, but we had no idea how big it was going to get.
Yeah. Well, it certainly was big. Moving on to Bianca, some of the work you've done has been really impactful, maybe in a different way from Popeyes, but really making us think about issues. For instance, with the Thinks ad, where you essentially depicted what it would be like if men had periods. How did that come about? It seems like such a great concept, and in a way it seems like an obvious thing to do, but it hadn't been really done before. And was it the only idea on the table? And was everybody on board with it from the start?
So when we were working on the project, I think we realized that the main reason that the stigma around periods exists is because only half of the population has them. So, and until everybody can relate to it or empathize, with having periods, the taboo can't really be broken. And that's how the idea came about. We saw a lot of ideas from the teams, and we ended up presenting, I think, about 4 or 5 campaigns to the clients. But we kept coming back to this one, which we called menstruation, because it felt bold and eye-opening, and to show how normal periods would be if everyone had them. And in terms of everybody being on board, I think we were grateful for our partners at Thinks, who trusted our creative vision and saw the potential in the idea right away, and obviously helped us build the idea. They're the experts on the subject, so we really worked together. But funny enough, a big barrier came after the campaign was already produced, which was getting networks to agree to air the spot as it was originally intended. So we knew already that things like showing blood stain and commercials weren't allowed by networks, right? Was something that they would censor, but we didn't anticipate getting getting them to not approve the spot because of the tampon string scene, for example. So we had a scene where you could see a little string under the underwear of one of the guys. And it was funny because the spot was getting banned for the exact point that he was trying to make, that if everyone was more comfortable with period, sensitivity and censorship around the topic wouldn't really exist. So we ended up turning the network censorship into a conversation, and the public just kind of was outraged, and we took that conversation to Twitter. And the networks kind of after that reevaluated and finally ran the once banned spot. So it was I think it ended up being the first commercial that ran in national TV that showed a tampon in use.
Yeah, amazing. And do you think it took maybe a younger creative outlook to go there? Was that part of how you got there?
I think I wouldn't say necessarily a younger outlook. I think it was a core group of people that, you know, understood the topic. Obviously, you know, women, but also a lot of the, you know, the Things client, they have such a diverse office and different perspectives and people that understand the topic in different ways. So I think it was more the combination of the different points of views rather than just, you know, the younger side of the team, I think.
Okay. I've got some shout outs here from people on social media. So just want to say hello and thank you to watching to Annie Zoe, Mickey James, Bala Venkit, Lisa Rosenberg, Tom Hangling, Ben Oberg, and Michelle Barrett. And if you're just joining us, I'm Alex Jardine, Associate Creativity Editor at Ad Age in London. And I just want to thank our sponsors again, Verizon Media, and supporting sponsors, the Ad Council, the Female Quotient, the It Gets Better Project, and the Miami Ad School. And now we're going to talk to Lauren. Lauren, one of the things that you worked on that also won some awards this week was the HBO Game of Thrones campaign, where you brought all those brands together to do things for the throne, including getting people to donate blood. How logistically challenging was that project? And was there a point at which you thought it wasn't going to be possible? How did that kind of come together?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely challenging. The whole idea kind of came from this insight that Game of Thrones has fans unlike any other. It was more than a show. It was actually this worldwide phenomenon. And if we could actually harness the power of these fans and get them and challenge them to prove their love. And we also noticed that they were willing to make sacrifices like the characters on the show and go to extreme lengths. And that's where kind of some of the ideas came from, even give their own blood. In terms of moments where I thought it wouldn't come together, I mean, absolutely. Even with the Super Bowl spot that you just played, we knew we wanted to do something in the Super Bowl. It was difficult because we couldn't give any spoilers to what would happen in season 8. So we had to do a Super Bowl spot that captured the audience and got everyone excited, but also not reveal anything. So we approached a few brands, you know, in different industries and sectors, and it just kind of, the stars aligned, and we were lucky to get such a great agency partner in Wyden and you know, really brave clients. But there were definitely touch and go moments for sure. I think that's what drove all of us, though, was the ambition to do something truly audacious that no one had done, kind of, and the excitement for the idea, and also that this was for the fans, and we were sort of, you know, the keepers of this show for the fans. We all kind of wanted to make it really special, and it drove us. Can I just ask,
were you a big Game of Thrones fan yourself?
Yeah, I was.
So you were really, ingrained in the culture. Yeah.
Not as much as my mom, though. My mom's like obsessed with the show. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I want to move on and talk a little bit more about just generally some of the issues going on today. First of all, we've got a panel of creatives this year that probably looks very different from how it might have done even 10 years ago. We've got 3 women and 1 man of color. And with everything that's going on at the moment, the lack of diversity in the industry has obviously been on everyone's minds. Can you talk a little bit about what you have observed about diversity in the creative department? The other day, we had Jeff Edwards from Saturday Morning on. I don't know if you saw it, any of you, but he was saying that if he was a young person today, he wouldn't even necessarily go into this industry because other industries are perhaps a bit more welcoming or easier to progress in. Is that an experience that any of you have had? Angela, do you want to start this one off?
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting about, just this panel in particular is Randy and I are strategists, right? Like we're like innately creative, but we're not in charge of actually creating spots themselves or, being responsible for creating that work. But as strategists, just kind of looking at our creative departments and seeing how easy it is to have a misstep when you don't have Black people or people of color or underrepresented groups represented in creative departments or in strategic thinking, you can miss the mark so easily. We see it happen. And as strategists, our job is to be aware of what's happening in culture and making sure that brands are listening to the people and that they're not just trying to do something because they want to do it necessarily, but because there's something backing it up, right? So with strategy, it's like there's some kind of insight, something that we are aware of that we're seeing in culture that makes sense for that creative piece of work. And so I think sometimes strategy isn't as prioritized as it should be because our job is to dig into what's happening in culture. Our job is to know that stuff and to bring that to our creatives and give them some creative inspiration, whatever the assignment is. And also making sure that, it aligns and it's aware and it's relevant and it's not going to miss the mark and be offensive because you weren't aware of like what the conversation was happening in social media, for example. So I kind of speak from that perspective of knowing how closely we love to work with our creatives, but just making sure that not only are we inspiring them, but we're educating them and making sure that if there's not someone represented, that is a problem. It needs to be pointed out. There need to be more Black creatives. There need to be more creatives of color. There need to be more underrepresented creatives actually being able to do that work, as well as there need to be strategists informing them to make sure they're creating the right kind of work.
And how has the industry been for you? Perhaps Randy, maybe you want to answer this. Just generally, how easy have you found it to be welcome or to, have you faced any obstacles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm super grateful that I was actually able to be introduced to the advertising industry through the MAPE program. So shout out to all the MAPers watching. And I think that really helped kind of me navigate, how to move within the industry, but also how to kind of create a community with just my fellow MAPers to talk about what's happening in advertising. Obviously, my experience is definitely not as hard as someone like Angela, who's a Black female in this industry. But at the same time, I think it's important to be able to reach out to people who is a minority in this industry and help them. Just coming from my perspective, one kind of change or shift that I've been seeing is that for the creative departments, at least, they're super willing and open to listen to different perspectives. I think really early in my career, and this is probably just me being very timid and, not wanting to speak up in the room, being, the only Asian person in the room. But I think nowadays, especially at our agency now, GSD&M, people are looking to us to make sure that there are no missteps. And while that's a really big responsibility, and I feel like as we progress, as advertising progresses, hopefully there needs to be more, or there will be more people of color, and there doesn't need to be just one single person you need to look at. But I think, just the willingness to listen and keep an open mind, and to not be so protective of the creative ideas, just in case we do kind of, see something a little problematic about it, or we need to adjust it in any way. I think our creatives, and I think creatives as a whole nowadays, are way more open to listening and, are aware of the blind spots that they might have.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Bianca, would you have any advice for people coming into the industry now, perhaps young women who are not sure if it's the place for them?
Yeah, I think, I know it's easy to get discouraged when we're looking around and we don't see necessarily people exactly like us at the top, and you think that's like you're saying before, a lot of people get discouraged by that and not think that's like the industry for them. But I think it's a moment where the industry needs more diversity, and they need like different perspectives. And like, we know that brings profitability even to work. Is not just like a nice thing to do. It's, something that everybody should be doing. So know that you are needed, and that's a great time for you to like start and not get discouraged by any of that. There's a big focus, in helping nurture those people, because I think for me, like a big part of it is that it's not enough to hire with diversity in mind. We need to be nurturing, those people. So I think as leaders, we need to be looking out like for them. We need to make sure that they get the same opportunities. We need to make sure that they're set up for success. So I think, just telling every like young female creative, or just like any other creative considering advertising or like struggling, just, the responsibility is on us to help you guys. And I mean, I think we're all in the movement and trying to do that. So it's a great moment, even though it's like hard to not see people like you around. I think
the leadership issue is kind of key to this, isn't it? Because it's people who are recruited on a diversity program, they don't always go on and stay in the industry or become a leader, and maybe there's no support in terms of grooming people to be leaders. Lauren, is that something you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what everyone said, and Bianca, what I think made a good point too. I know for me, I kind of fell into advertising, and I think the difference is now we need to be deliberate. We need to go and find different types of people, different voices, voices we haven't heard. It's something we're definitely committed to at Daroga. I help manage the D5 and 10 program, which is a program exclusively for advertising perspectives who have no previous experience. But I think it's really important to actually kind of take more of a active role in seeking them out. I think in previous generations, it was more of, treating everyone the same. And I don't think that's enough anymore. We actually have to be more of an activist and be more nurturing and, foster different talent intentionally.
Yeah. Something else I also wanted to ask about was the other big thing that's going on at the moment, which is the pandemic. We've heard, I think it was David Droga who said in a session the other day that he felt that this was a more difficult time for the younger people in the industry, particularly because, missing the office, people don't always live in a big house with a family or whatever. You might be in a small apartment or sharing with housemates, and it's pretty hard on people. Is there anything that anyone would like to say on that? Bianca, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, it's particularly hard. I think also like with a lot of young people missing like internships or like doing that out like from, outside the office. So having like less chance to interact. And I think, again, it's a little bit of like something that leaders have to take on and like, offer and be open to still look out for them. And I think, if anything, the pandemic made us also adapt and, work in different ways. So I think maybe using that also to, using that as an opportunity to connect more with like people that we wouldn't otherwise if we're at the office and we're busy and we're like on our like routine and day to day. So I think I can, speak for me that I've been like having more calls with like younger people that reach out and like they're sort of, either, like without an opportunity of work right now, or they just got off college. And I've been like, spending time talking and, mentoring. And I encourage other people to do the same. But it's a difficult time, I think.
Is there more that the leaders of agencies can be doing to help that younger generation? Lauren, is that something you've had to think about at Droga?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's just, as the guys have said too, of just listening and knowing, being aware when, what's happening outside of our decks. If people need to take breaks or, miss a review. So just being more aware and more ready to hear people and where they're at and meet them where they're at. I know with this business, it's also hard with just the high expectations and the way that we just kind of move from one thing to the next. In an office, it's easy to lose the idea that you're actually supposed to nurture people in the process. And I think with this, it's kind of forced us to take a pause and do a mental health check-in, make sure people are okay.
Yeah, I would have to totally agree with that. I mean, I know just myself, like being available on Teams or whatever, Slack, whatever you use, it's breeding a culture of like, I have to be available. Like that little green dot has to be there. Otherwise I'm seen as not working. And one thing I think our team does a really good job about is just, giving each other breaks. If you need help, if you need someone to kind of step in for you, all you got to do is just send a quick note, and it's not the end of the world. It's not a big deal, and I think it is hard for everybody, but yeah, especially for younger creatives. I think as leaders or people within our agency, we have to be super open to just making sure that we are listening to them, but also we are helping them create the work and being there just to support. I know for Angela and I specifically, like we really work well when we collaborate. Like she said earlier, we used to share a cube and we literally used to talk all day. I really feel bad for our cube mates. Sorry, Shannon, but we literally would like chat all day and talk through the work. And since we don't have that time anymore, we definitely try to schedule 1 hour calls just to chat about what's going on in each other's lives. And if we get to fit the work in, that's great. But I think for the most part, like, chatting with your coworkers is so key. So making that room and making sure that everyone's getting a break, I think is great.
Yeah.
Okay, just a quick one before we wrap up. Can any of you comment on a really good leadership tip that you've had from a mentor that you've worked with, or perhaps you've heard, even if you didn't hear it directly from them? I don't know who wants to.
I'll jump
take
in.
this one.
I'll jump in. So one thing I did want to circle back just a little bit and address the fact that we're in 2 pandemics, just to make sure that it's, something that people are very aware of and conscious of. There's the pandemic of COVID-19, there's pandemic of racism, and it's very important that like we're aware of that because what happens outside the walls affects the work that you produce, and if you're able to do the work at the highest level. So just being super conscious of that is really important. I will say, as far as leadership, Randy actually used to be my boss, and he was one of the most phenomenal leaders I've ever had, because I was able to learn from him, and we would collaborate and talk all the time. But one of the most important things was him being very understanding of my perspective, of my opinion, of things that I knew that maybe he didn't, and making sure to open that door and making sure that I was able to have, a seat at the table and talk about the things that I knew that were important to the brands that we worked on, the clients that we worked on. And then also our boss, Janice, who's absolutely incredible, is extremely understanding all the time and is very open to, hearing what we think about things. She's been great during these pandemics as well. Just continuing to be a leader, continuing to kind of say, do you want to work on something else? Like, what are you interested in doing? Do you want to lead this thing? I think you should lead this. Like those kinds of leadership, skills, if you will, are extremely important. Going to the people that work, under you, that you manage, and making sure you're asking them, are they doing okay? What are they interested in doing? And making sure you're giving them those opportunities. So those are a couple of things that I've experienced, both having Randy as a former boss and then Janice as well at GSD&M, that I think are super important for just people to understand and kind of take on some of those traits.
Great. I think we have to wrap up now, guys, which is a real shame because we could have gone on for a lot longer. But thank you all so much for joining us in the Future of Creativity, and good luck to you all. So I'm going to say goodbye to these guys now, and up next, bye. Up next, we have a message from our sponsor, Verizon Media, and we will see you again in a little while.
Welcome, everyone, to the Ad Age Publishers Fireside with our Future of Creativity's presenting sponsor, Verizon Media. I'm Josh Golden, the president and publisher of Ad Age, and today I have with me Jeff Rickier, who is the director of demand and ad partnerships for Verizon Media. Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Hi, Josh.
How are you? Are you doing well?
Yeah, doing very well. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. I got my new space I can do recording in. I'm excited about it. Just before we get started, can you tell me a little about your role, Jeff, just so we have the opportunity to sort of hear a little about that?
Yeah, sure. So at Verizon Media, I'm in charge of driving demand for some of our strategic partnerships. And right now, I'm really focused on the CTV marketplace.
Right. And I know that Verizon Media has really always been supportive of and specifically committed to corporate social responsibility. Can you speak to how the company has augmented its CSR response during this really challenging time?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for asking that. There's been a lot of news on what Verizon Media has done publicly. But one thing that I don't think a lot of people understand is what they're doing privately within Verizon Media, and something that I've been really impressed with. They're establishing areas and environments that people are very safe to talk about these issues that are happening around us, and really open up and be honest and be vulnerable. And I think that's, for me personally, it's really given me the opportunity to increase my self-awareness around these things, but also how I need to think differently and how I need to think honestly, and really how I need to take some personal responsibility on being the best ally that I can. So I've been really happy with what obviously Verizon is doing in the public marketplace, but especially happy with what they're doing privately within the walls of our corporation.
Let me pivot if I can. I just today, or I think it was on Tuesday, we reported that the new fronts and the upfronts are changing, and everything is looking at potentially positioning it about calendar versus May. Everything's sort of up in the air. Before that news broke, what trends were you seeing? And about how brands are activating, knowing that it's such a challenging time right now to sort of have a plan for even looking into next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting to be part of this marketplace right now, because we're seeing things happen that haven't happened around linear TV and linear buying in the last 70 years. And so what we're seeing is kind of like a perfect storm of everything coming together. So COVID-19, the pandemic, obviously has slowed down the publication, the production of a lot of programming. It also put a pause on live sports. And those are the two anchors and cornerstones around the upfront negotiations and conversations. And so those are kind of off the table right now, but some of them are going to be starting up or have started up in the recent weeks. And then you layer on also all the economic pressures that are happening within our country. I mean, it was just last week that we finally admitted that we're in a recession. And so that's going to affect how many products consumers can buy, but it also affects advertisers and how much of a budget that they have to come into the marketplace with. But it also makes them be very specific and careful on how they're planning those budgets. And so you combine all those things, and we're starting to see really a change in the tide in the linear buying experience, where it used to be a truly seller's market, and now that's shifting into a buyer's market. And that's pretty interesting and exciting to be a part of.
What is that shift creating? And when you think about that positioning of a buyer's, the shifting from a seller's to a buyer's market, how are brands behaving differently now that they have they're empowered to make very large decisions?
Right. Yeah. So I think they're more empowered, and they have more leverage to dictate how the upfront process is going to happen. And so a lot of them want to go to a calendar year scheduling. And a lot of them want to actually try to hold back some of their upfront budget and save it for the scatter market. There's reports that predict that up to $10 billion are going to come out of the upfront marketplace this year and be put into the scatter market. But what I'm really impressed with is how the broadcasters are reacting to this and how closely they're partnering with their advertising partners and responding to those needs. You know, NBC just said, hey, we've got our fall lineup. I think they just released this a few hours ago. We've got our fall lineup. It's not going to change. But just last week or earlier this week, they did come out and say, we understand we have to be more flexible around the timing of upfronts. And so I think it's really great to see both sides of that relationship coming together and seeing some flexibility from both of those folks.
Amazing. Before we continue, let me remind our audience about what's coming up later today. Let's take a look at this afternoon's program. Actually, I got to tell you, Jeff. As a cord cutter, I just am a newly cord cutted human. I find myself in the position where I am, I thought of myself in some capacity that I was late to this game, but now seeing with the influence of the pandemic and everyone being at home and both cost savings influencing that, I think we're seeing. I would argue that we're seeing many more people willing to sort of jump into an AVOD, SVOD, watching content wherever they can get it. Is that accurate, or is that just my focus group of one perception?
No, I mean, that's pretty accurate. So, and what's interesting is that when we went into this COVID pandemic situation, everybody was staying home, the usage on these streaming services exploded. I think Nielsen just came out and said year over year, usage patterns have increased by about 80%, 81%. Wow. Pre-COVID to where we are today, that's exploded by 50%. But a lot of people are calling it a bubble, right? And a bubble implies that at some point that it will burst and deflate again. But really what we're seeing is that usage pattern sustaining itself. And it's important to realize what's happening around us and why that's so special. So like 49 of 50 states have opened up their services to some degree again. It's beautiful out right now. Up here in Boston, it's like 72 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. People are going outside more. But those usage patterns that have exploded over the last 3 months are sustaining themselves. And that's really exciting. And that's what we're seeing.
Interesting. In the moment that we're facing right now, which is an extraordinary amount of change, and really, what used to be the rule of status quo is now actually, there is no how we've done it before. And I would argue that so many brands and agencies are now thinking about moments of brand arbitrage to see, like, let's take advantage of this particular opportunity. And sort of, given that we're talking about, the future of creativity, I'm curious, if you were to offer some suggestions to brand marketers about how they could be doing something differently and what they should be taking advantage of at this moment that you could inform them about. Yeah,
that's a good question. So I've never been on the creative side of business, so I'm not going to try to give advice on creatively how they should be activating their brands. But I think, from a creative standpoint, brands really want to think creatively of how they go about reaching their audience through connected devices and TVs, especially with this mass migration from linear TV over to connected devices. And they also want to be creative about how they're planning their campaigns. And so it's not just like, we're not in a world anymore where it's either I'm going to buy linear television or I'm going to buy digital video. You have to be creative in understanding how those two come together and really complement each other, and how it can create incremental reach to specific audiences and demographics that brands need to go out and communicate with. And then they have to be creative in how they're measuring those campaigns and making sure that the right measurements and the partners that they have can provide the metrics that are going to prove out the KPIs that they set forth at the beginning of the planning cycle. Now, for Verizon Media, we're challenging ourselves to be creative on how we package our services as well. Not only do we own like 30 of the best brands in the digital space today, but we also partner with the most strongest and premium producers of content in the marketplace as well. And so we're trying to get creative on how we're packaging all those offerings, packaging all that supply to make it super easy for these buyers to activate against.
When you're thinking about the quantity of change that's happened, I can't imagine. I mean, you just mentioned a few of them, but you must have even had to reprioritize what products might make the most sense for the marketplace. Have you come up with anything new during the time, or dropped something?
Yeah, I mean, our product offering is fairly liquid. It's always being optimized to to react to what the market needs are. But what we're also really focused on is prioritizing being the best partner to all our brand partners and advertising partners and agency partners. And what that means is, as we experience this migration from linear to connected devices, how can we be leaders in this space, and how can we educate people that may not be adept in buying programmatically or on CTV devices, and how we can show them that it's a true complement to what they've been doing.
Jeff, thank you so much. Jeff Riquier, Director of Demand and Ad Partnerships for Verizon Media. Thank you for joining me today. And thank you to Verizon Media for sponsoring this terrific conference.
Great, Josh. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, bye-bye.
Hey everyone, I'm Eugene Sherwood, Associate Creativity Editor here at Ad Age. We just had a really interesting panel hosted by Alex Jardine with some young creatives, and that was some cool info from our sponsor, Verizon Media. Next up, though, we now have a panel on creating work that incorporates Black voices. So I want to introduce our moderator, Global Director for Culture and Community at Twitter, Goddess Rivera.
Hey everybody! Hey. Was that very calming music on before I got on? Is that what everyone heard?
Yeah, it's jazzy and slow.
That was a vibe. I like it.
It's getting to the end of the week, right?
I like it. How are you doing today?
I'm quite happy today because I'm actually really excited for this panel. We've got a really great group of people to talk here that you've brought on board.
I'm excited. Lots of good friends. We're ready to go.
Awesome. So yeah, let's bring them on.
Great. So I think I'll go just kind of one at a time. I'm super excited to bring on Jayelle Dorsainville. She is a good friend of mine and the Director of Social Strategy at MRM McCann. Also going to bring on Brendon Henderson. He is Director of Creative Strategy over at Condé Nast. What up? Yes, the Sade in the back. I'm loving it. And also the incredible Jamira Burley. She is an activist and organizer, community impact strategist. What up, girl? Philly to New York vibes. How is everybody today?
Fantastic.
Great.
Yeah. I'm alive. It's a good day.
All right, so I am going to pop out, but I will be back with some questions for social in a little bit. All right?
Okay, cool. All right, we're gonna kick it off. So how is everybody doing, y'all? I feel like we're just kicking out on a call, right? It has been, I think we all know, just extremely emotional, almost transformative couple of weeks, especially to be Black and in advertising media as a community organizer. It's been so much going on. So I think this is a really important panel and conversation to me, because I wanted to really talk through what kind of is happening in the advertising and media fields and how what's happening in the world right now. We're seeing a ton of just really a kind of pushback finally against racial injustice. Black voices are standing up. We are being heard. And so I really want to take today to talk about what it means to be Black in these spaces. We all work in this field. We've all had our experiences. And to us and to everybody, this is kind of like a watershed moment. The moment that I think we all have kind of been looking for. It's both heartening and disheartening that it's happening right now, but I think we're glad to be going forward. So today we're just going to kind of dig into, I know you all work in different perspective fields that really do affect the outcome of media and advertising that the global world sees. So I want to get into how work processes and different types of ways that we can approach the work outputs can really help us incorporate Black voices, Black culture. And it's something that we all have probably been trying to do for most of our careers. I know that I have. And I'm really proud of the work that I'm doing at Twitter now, which allows me to connect with incredible voices from underrepresented groups like Black Twitter. Shout out Jamira. She's one of the dopest voices on Twitter. Please follow her. So let's kind of dig into it. But I thought at first that we could kind of start off with a little bit of a grounding experience for all of us. So I wanted to ask everybody, and I know this is probably be different for everyone, what kind of is that first time that you felt in your field and strategy and organizing and trying to connect with brands, what's the first time that you kind of felt a little misunderstood, or did you feel a little out of place? Did you see some work that you was like, I know that ain't finna get approved? Like, you know, what was that? I know I've had that experience. So kind of what was that time that you felt a little bit like, whoa, this industry doesn't really understand Black voices and we could be doing better? Jayelle, I think I'm gonna shoot it to you.
So, wow. So it's funny because we do this great work, and I know we all we love what we do. And I'm so passionate, about social media marketing and digital content, right? And just creating just really smart work. And I was working on a campaign, and there's some data that came through that showed that there was bias, implicit bias in something that was, in the product. And I kind of looked up, what are we going to do? Are we going to work to change this, to improve this, now that we know what's happening, especially toward the Black community? And unfortunately, I was kind of met with, well, there's nothing that we can do right now. And it was like, well, is there a 5-year plan? Is there something that we're working toward?
Right.
And no, so it was kind of like a kick in the gut, because I was really, excited about the work and everything that I was doing as a Black marketer and Black advertiser to reach my people. And unfortunately, there wasn't really much that could be done. So that was unfortunate.
That's rough. Brendon, I know you have a lot of thoughts, especially how insights and data kind of come into this scope. What would your experience be? Thanks for sharing, Jayelle.
Yeah, I think the first time was actually, I was working in Chicago, and it's like a 2-part thing. It's like what happened at work and then what happened outside. So this is 2011, and nobody actually knows who Kevin Hart is. And that blew my mind. I'm like, we're pitching for work with him. And because he wasn't the superstar that he is now,
right?
Nobody that wasn't Black in the office knew who he was, didn't want to do it, didn't understand the importance or the value of doing it. And talent, that happens all the time. People you take for granted, especially now in social, because we're kind of in the echo chamber. You take for granted that people understand what's happening in culture. But I'll never forget, and Chicago is sort of historically a very segregated city. I remember getting on the train or coming to the train platform after that conversation and seeing all my white colleagues on the opposite side of the platform and me sort of going to the south side on one side, going north on the other side. And I thought, wow, okay, now it makes sense why they don't get it. We literally live in 2 different worlds. And it was sort of like a movie-like experience. But I'll say that was the time where I'm like, okay, not only am I not understood, but I probably won't be anytime soon.
Wow. I've definitely been there. Jamera, you on the spot, girl.
It's so funny when you said the question, I was like, I know exactly what I want to talk about. So I think it was shortly after, I became an activist, or whatever that means. There's not a moment that clicked, but it was shortly after, when I was like 17 or 16 years old. And I remember we had created this anti-violence program. We wanted to really give the power to young people to feel like they can transform their communities. And we were talking to a number of media companies who wanted to tell the trajectory of young people, right? And how they've been directly impacted by violence. But I remember sitting in those meetings, hearing them describe how we were living in the world and how we were directly impacted by violence. And it was very much from a victim-centered approach or a trauma-centered approach. And it's oftentimes with many brands, when they engage our community, it's very much from Oppression Olympics, tell your worst story to impact the most audiences. And while I'm a storyteller, I love to tell stories. I believe stories can transform communities. I think it's really harmful when the stories about Black and Brown folks are always from a victim-centered approach and not from a survivor-centered approach, right? How have these communities overcome? What have they been able to do because despite what they've experienced directly in their lives? So it blew my mind, and it's always been something that I've considered as I talk about my story and the stories of other young people, is making sure I center their survival and not the things that they've been victimized by.
Whew. Y'all gonna get me emotional up in here. I think, I also had similar experiences. I think a lot about the data and insights that have come back and, looking at them it tells, I always say data tells half the story, you know? And I also had this kind of moment where I had some data come back, and I remember, no shade to Ludacris, but there was a time, it was maybe like 2017-ish, and some data had came back and everybody was like, we need to find a celeb to go with for this. And Ludacris came up and I was like, I don't know, y'all, not hip hop, like maybe some Fast and Furious or something like that. But it was so funny that something had happened in the news with him that week. And so he was spiking, but I had the cultural competency to understand, like, we were talking 2002, that probably would have been the time, right, to do something music related. And we should be thinking more Hollywood if it comes to that. So that kind of came back. And also Brendon just having that moment too about that Kevin Hart moment where I realized, why do I have to know everything about my culture and yours, and you don't know anything about me? And I think that was the point where I was like, there is something very wrong in this industry that we need to fix and we need to evolve. So part of that actually leads me to the next question for everyone is this idea around, you know, what are some of the departments or orgs within agencies, within brand side, media side, that we think can really start to come into the conversation. One of the struggles that I had being a strategist, being a former director of social strategy, still strategist in my heart, that I found that every time I would talk about, we need more cultural competency, we need more diversity, they would go HR, hiring, retention. And it was kind of like this broken record. I couldn't get people kind of off of that plane. And we've all mentioned today, Jamira, you talked about being in a briefing for a project. You talked about kind of some data that came back, Jayelle and Brendon. So I want to know more from you guys about what are some of the orgs and departments that you feel could start to integrate this type of different way of thinking or some processes. I think about media targeting, stuff, you know, all the way down to delivery and project management and account and vendor selection. So I would love to hear from you. Brendon, I'm gonna throw it to you.
Yeah, I think it's across the board. And I hear what you're saying in terms of the work. One of the things I always say in terms of just to touch on HR is we always think about it from a race perspective, but we never talk about it from a socioeconomic perspective. Mm. And I always feel like, you know, poor people are the most creative people in the world because they have to be out of necessity. And so we don't, to me, add enough, like from a socioeconomic background, the agency world is like private high school just continued on, you know,
okay. Speak on
continuum. And so I think like just adding more perspectives that way. But in terms of doing the work, you spoke on it. Data, I mean, since like 2010, everybody's been talking about big data and people are involved, but nobody's talked about competency. Like, what does that mean? I think back, and this is not even a race example, but it's a good example of, we had a client come to us and say, hey, we really want to do something around football. And the data came back that their target was across all these states in the South, and they wanted to do NFL football. And the data scientist is like, great, we should do NFL, and these are the places. The data scientists didn't even realize there aren't NFL teams in those states. There's no NFL team in Alabama and Mississippi. You know what I mean? Like wasn't even able to interpret that and say, you know what, maybe we should switch our strategy to college football. That's what actually resonates, where your target is. And people just aren't able to, or aren't trained to, I should say, interpret beyond what they see. And so that goes for data, that goes for strategists who work with data, even if it's, you know, first party, whatever it is, syndicated data. But then you brought up an interesting point around targeting, where I think it's such a rigid, the tools we have are so limiting in terms of targeting that I'm not sure what could be done there. And I'd have to speak to somebody who's sort of, but from a strategy standpoint, I think it's on strategists and strategist-minded people, like, you know, me as well, former strategists and strategists at my heart, to push those conversations about culture versus data.
Right.
Jayelle?
Yeah, Brendon, you really hit on it, you know, because I'm thinking about the teams that are most affected. And I'm thinking about the late nights that I've spent at my agency, just trying to put out a pitch. And I'm thinking that it's your strategist, you know, at first. Those are the people that are creating the briefs that then go into the hands of our creative folks who are, you know, at the agency till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning trying to put out some creative. But here's the thing, when you're under that type of pressure, you're not going to go and, you know, get this pressure tested by someone that is really related to the audience. It's just, unfortunately, it doesn't happen. So we have to make this part of the process. So if that creative person or that creative team needs like a cultural liaison or someone they can even reach out to at, unfortunately, these late hours, wee hours in the morning, then that's what has to be done, right? And it has to be a procedural thing. It has to be part of the process because we can't cut corners. We see what happens when we cut corners. So
I love it. I love it. Jameer, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I agree and add on, right? So I agree that first I will say is that all of them, every single department needs to have some level of cultural competence because Black voices, Black stories, Black experiences don't live in silos. And I think it oftentimes is put on the responsibility of one individual department or one individual person to be able to tell you everything about Black folks, right? And that's just unrealistic because the experiences of Blackness is diverse, it is economically different. And so I do like the idea, though, that there is a processes in place, especially if there is no one on the team that looks like the communities that you're trying to engage. Is there someone within the organization or a team within the organization that is responsible for doing that culture or that competence check to ensure before things go out the door? I would also say we have to recognize too that, a lot of brands oftentimes put out very triggering content products, knowing that it is not cultural sensitive or knowing that it's going to cause a backlash. And so what folks need to realize that there needs to be a larger conversation around race and equity that leads all the way from the top to the bottom, because long term, it doesn't look good for the brand, even if the short term gains is worth it.
I love that. Really, really happy to have some different choices in syrup this week, might I add as well. So a little bit of progress being made. I'm thinking about the voices too. So that was something that I also really, it spoke to me. For me, Black Twitter specifically was always kind of a place where I could see it was the block. It was the stoop. I could see what was hot, what was going on. Black voices, the way that they used Twitter was just absolutely transformational for culture and still is. And so I also think a lot about how creative is, we all say creative was the king of the ad world, right? It was like everybody's job was to make sure that creative can sell through, that it works, that it's award winning. And we get that. But what I often see thinking about this kind of cultural perspective was that creators was just kind of a one way to think about different voices. And so I actually have been really excited to connect with what I call as voices. I'm connecting with people by perspectives and hoping that we can learn more to help our partners, our service evolve in a better notion. Jameer, because you're one of our amazing Twitter voices, I would just love to hear from you about what do you think it looks like for a brand to start to better understand these voices? We talked about kind of that socioeconomic barrier and that kind of ignorance there. How can they start to better find and also connect with people from these communities in these ways that isn't just like the traditional kind of creator, but also people who can bring perspective in the room and want to be partnered with?
Yeah, I think it's a collaboration of one, recognizing the purpose, right? Is your purpose to gain media attraction, to do something that's very sexy in the moment, or are you trying to bring long-term sustainable change? And if you want to bring long-term sustainable change, it is about doing your due diligence, right? It is internally mimicking the same values that externally you talk about, right? So if you are externally talking about human rights and equity for women, and internally you are mimicking those same policies and practices, it doesn't come off as authentic. And that's not just for-profit. I've seen the same behaviors at nonprofits, which I'm sure many of us has. Right. I would also say, though, there is a need to ensure that you're engaging local organizations and local representatives in those communities who can tell you about the day-to-day lives of those folks who are oftentimes so much more invested in local change versus the national policy that oftentimes don't trickle down to local communities. And so I would say do your due diligence, but the first goal would be to mimic those same kind of ideologies internally, hire diverse voices, not just that one-off Black person, but just a range of folks who have unique experience and a cultural competence of what's actually happening and who feel empowered to actually push back when something internally wrong. The last thing I'll say is, a lot of the campaigns that's come out over the last few years that have been pretty toxic, and I'll just say that we always say, I wish there was one Black person in the room, right? Why didn't they have any Black person look over this? And I think oftentimes those companies actually did have one Black person look over this. but that person didn't feel empowered. They were afraid of losing their job. And so how are you creating the internal mechanisms where folks feel like they can push back in a way that's constructive?
I love it. Y'all taking me to church this morning. I don't know if they can see me, but I'm like, for all of this, because this is the kind of conversations that I crave for, and I'm so glad to see are happening now. And again, just for anybody who may have just joined, I'm Goddess Rivera, Global Director of Culture and Community at Twitter. My past life, Director of Social Strategy for many years. So I want to get back into the social strategy, and then Brendon, I'm going to kick it to you. But Jayelle, I want to start with you. There's a lot of brands right now. We just talked about Jamira just mentioned that some brands have done some not so great campaigns and things have missed the mark. Going forward, as far as social strategy, what is it that you think brands could start to think about to ensure that they are incorporating Black voices and Black perspectives into the work? We talked a little bit about why that's important, how we can connect with them from a social strategy standpoint. What do you think is some of the things they need to really make sure they're including?
So, I mean, the process for me and my team always really starts with like our briefing and what those research and insights look like. And I think that as a strategist, it's really hard to humble yourself and say, I don't know. I don't understand. And fortunately, I'm incapable of really knowing this audience. So it's like reaching out to your regional teams on more of a cadence that makes the connection and that conversation easier. So if you're touching base with them once a month, once a quarter even, but making sure that they're part of the briefing process. So for instance, I work on global brands that often reach audiences in India. I'm a Black woman that lives in New Jersey. How could I possibly know what's going on in India? So I'm constantly talking to my New Delhi teams and ensuring that they are part of the messaging process, that they're reviewing my creative. There are cultural concerns that I could never understand. So it makes me a better marketer. It makes our work better. And you have to ensure that this is part of the process moving forward. And I just think that Black voices are often used as a tool. They're not often respected. Our vernacular is often used to make your tweet go viral, and that is not enough. So when you provide a platform for the voices that already exist and seek them out, leaning on your community manager to identify those people, you're then going to come out with work that's not only better and that will make you more money, but it'll also be culturally sensitive and culturally competent.
I love it. Also, the team just told me that you can pull some comments up on the stage. So my peoples, if you're in here, I'm gonna shout y'all out. Pull up, give us some comments and some love. Hey, Natasha, what up? Jason Goldberg, there's a few folks in here. But thank you, Jayelle. Sorry, y'all know I act up. But Brendon, I want to ask you one more thing. You are the head of creative strategy, which I love those two words together. And I think, you do a lot of storytelling. What is it that you want to see from this moment going forward for Black storytellers, whether they're creators or they're activists, organizers? How do you foresee us being able to expand how brands and partners can do a better job of telling the story?
Yeah, I think even just to go back to what Jay was talking about, like there is just a lack of humanity when people from outside of a culture express things from another culture, right? And in the strategy world, like if you're going to talk about people from India, you tap in with people from India. If you're going to talk about a car, you go to that car dealership and find out from the source, right? And to me, the next wave of creative is about brands investing in and lifting up the voices of the storytellers and not co-opting and not sort of partnering with and watering down, but funding what story that you want to tell. I think people often think and talk about, it's funny, like the same person in your office that's listening to Rap Caviar that's asking you about Insecure, when you pitch something Black, they'll say, this is not an urban campaign. But you're not urban, but you connect with the culture, right? It's because we're human, but a lot of times people don't see the humanity in us on it. When it's in front of them, as in the work environment, but they connect with the story sort of when it's outside of them. And so getting people to understand that Black stories are stories, they're human stories, but they should be told from the perspective of the people who are going through that experience. And so to me, it's like, it's almost like brands take this Medici role, right, where they're investing in the artists of the community to see better sort of creative output out there and create a better world through that. And when you think about the ROI of that, because that's what everybody's always going to judge it on, right? It's greater cultural competency of everybody in your world, but then it's also sort of the equity, right? You see, I'll just take like Condé Wiley. He's done a lot of, great artists. He's done some partnerships that's given those brands a lot of equity in communities they wouldn't have because they've invested in people that that the community recognizes as, great storytellers, like you said, regardless of what the medium is. So I think that really, to me, is the next wave, and it's something we're definitely talking about and trying to implement at Condé Nast right now.
I love that. Thank you so much. I think I love Condé's work. I mean, just the New Yorker cover, I think it was just this week, it was beyond powerful, very moving and emotional. And I'm thinking about just kind of going back to what's happening in the country right now. We are fighting for racial injustice. And also just like your words triggered me a little bit, Brendon, but not in a bad way, but just this idea that we are, as Black people, constantly fighting to be seen as human. Constantly fighting to be seen as real. And it goes back to that, where there's all of this stuff to pull from and take, and it's really hard to get people to give and to pour into us as humans. And with that, Jameer, I want to just ask you, I remember just last weekend we were texting and I was making sure you were okay. You were on the front lines marching for Black lives, and really out here doing the work. And I heard you talk about how it's important for people to connect in local organizations and finding people. Let's say that connection happens. I think there's a lot of brands out here who are like, I don't know what to do. Do I write a check? Do I set up a meeting? Is it just investing? Is it office space? I mean, is it a campaign? I think a lot of people are nervous to do the wrong thing, and then we see inaction because of that. As an activist, as a community organizer on the front lines, what is it that you think is the most efficient way, from a campaign perspective to investment perspective, that people are looking for to how brands can kind of amplify voices right now and forever?
No, that's a really great point. And his comment actually triggers something for me too, is that, Black folks are always seen as the condiment to the meal versus like an essential part. We're the ketchup or the salt and pepper versus, So I think in that same regards, because I'm clearly hungry, in that same regard, I think companies who are really invested in transformative change and Black liberation, right, needs to recognize that not all Black people should and want to speak on behalf of Black issues, right? Identifying those who have a level of expertise. I'm a firm believer that individuals are the experts of their own experience, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have the overarching cultural competence or the overarching understanding of the movement, the demands for the movement. And so, yes, in some instances, we are asking you to write checks, right? And not just one-off checks. Like, how are you making 3 to 5 year investments in organizations who are trying to actually create sustainable change, so that way they're not shifting their mission every 3 to 5 years to meet the demands of the dollars based on this popular or sexy time that we're in. At the same time is, the relationship between you and the community needs to be mutually beneficial. So how are you paying people for their time and not just asking them to sit in these think tanks and give their input and experience? Because to be honest, to talk about my experience is trauma every single time. And it's not fair to expect people to constantly pour into you and you're not reciprocating that same energy. And the last thing I'll say is, it's really important that we move beyond just the social capital. I think if you're going to find folks who are representative of communities, who have a shared experience, who are seen as an authority figure or an authentic voice, it's really require you to look beyond just like the social media numbers. So how are you finding folks who have following, but also have standing in the community and not just a large following? And that requires asking more questions. If people can't give you direct experience to the representation of what they talk about, I think that's a moment in time you should question their legitimacy within the space. Because oftentimes organizations, companies choose our leader, but that's not a reflective of who the leader of the community has chosen.
Come on now, talk about it. This is really great. I know we don't have much time left, but Jameer, I just want to give one more kind of actionable piece to that. If there is a company or a brand, do you think one example of someone who's done this well recently, on the spot,
On the spot, and I would actually say Sephora. So even before the recent jump-offs of protests and police killings, Sephora had commissioned a report, or are in the process of commissioning a report to identify the barriers and the experience of Black and Latinos as their experience in the retail industry. And they formulated a coalition of about 30 or 35 equity advisors from a range of different industries. They're compensating those equity advisors. They're allowing their platform to be used for those equity advisors. So it's really integrating in the entire process. And like the equity advisors have even heard directly from the CEO. So it's not just like an offshoot project. It's actually ingrained in every single aspect of the organization. And I think that's one example. There's been some, but I think, it has to be across organizations from the top down, and there has to be real money behind it.
I love that. And I know we're going to close out soon, but that's just one of the things that's really important to me in my work, is just that I'm taking the voices and the perspective of people from many underrepresented groups, from Black voices in Black Twitter to Native Indigenous Twitter to differently abled, Latinx. There's so much that we can take back and then help to inform across our entire organizations, from product to HR. There's so many ways that we can continue to evolve by infusing this. So I know we don't have much time left. So Jayelle, Brendon, I know Jameer had a chance to just kind of really give her kind of final point, but I would love to just know from both of you, what is one thing you want to see going forward, and something you never want to see again? If this is the turning point, this is the pivotal moment, what is one thing you want to see going forward that absolutely could guarantee that Black voices and other perspectives will be included in the work, and then something you never want to see again? Jayelle, I see you thinking, but I want to call on you.
I was like, I really hope that she asked Brendon first. Brendon, go first. Give me like 2 seconds.
No, I got it. It's all good. What we talked about earlier, right, is was spot on. I think Jameer said, like, it has to hit every department. And Jayelle was talking about the process has to allow for it. That means project managers and producers need to be in on this with us. You just talked about product and the impact that has. But to me, it's how do we make this sustainable is the thing that I want to see go forward. And so by that, I mean, what systems are we putting in place that will live beyond us? What are the policies that we're rewriting versus the soft, like, cultural change, or we'll hire more people, but how are their voices actually impacting the work? And to me, I would love to see brands, just like when you're making a social strategy or whatever strategy you're making, you look at your brand identity, you understand your brand identity model, and you say, what do we have a right to talk about? That same framework that you feel like you've outlined for yourself as a brand that you have a right to talk about, that's where you make the impact in the community. You gave that Sephora example. It's great because it focuses on retail, a place they have a right to talk about. I think where a lot of brands go wrong is, let me just write a check randomly to, I think, like, whatever, NAACP Defense Fund. It's like, okay, but how does that actually impact the world that you have the right to talk about, that you own and you can make an impact on in a sustainable way over time, versus, oh, let me make this one, maybe make this one donation, and that's not something that changes the work going forward. So the one-time donation is the thing that I want to see we move away from, and the sustainable investment and elevation of voices in the world that brands have sort of defined for themselves is what I want to see move forward.
Awesome. And Jayelle, I know you might still be using those last 30 seconds, but I still have hopes and dreams to see the brief transformed. Everybody knows I love a good, sexy brief. Mm-hmm. I love it. I love to get a nice, solid brief, girl. Give me some insights. Yes. So I think that there's places in that. Sorry, my house phone is ringing, guys. But I think there's places in that we could really work to incorporate Black voices. So Jayelle, I'm going to throw it to you.
Right. I mean, there is something to be said about being on the right side of history, right? And I do think, the colleagues and I have been talking a lot lately about value-based marketing. And when you think about a company, for instance, Chick-fil-A, that is very problematic for me for many reasons, but they kind of fortunately, they stand by what they believe in, and they are winning because of it. So I do think that brands should take that leap and stand for what is right. what we're fighting for and what is happening in our world right now is really, there are no sides. We're just saying we want to end racial injustice and bring about more racial equality. So when you think about that as a core value for your brand and for your company, there is no way that you can lose. And when you really start to inherit those values and make them part of what you do on a day-to-day basis, you can only win and benefit. So I really do think that you have to bring in the right people, have the smart folks on your team that represent these voices and these cultures. And there's no way that you can lose. And be public about it. Be public about the changes you're making. And we will work with you. The communities will stand by you as you make these changes. Where we are not perfect, no one is. So accept what you may have done in the past, accept those wrongs, and move forward with a steadfast process and plan.
Woo. Well, with those words, guys, I think those are great words to kind of take us out on. This has been amazing. This has been a conversation that I've been wanting to have since I stepped my little toe in the advertising and media field. So I want to thank you so much, Jayelle, Jamira, Brendon. You guys are dope. I'm Goddess Rivera, representing Twitter, the bird baby. I hope everybody learned something today and had a really kind of a great, insightful morning. So everybody have a great day, and I will see you all later. See you in these Twitter. Bye.
Hey everyone, that was a great panel. I love the point that Jamira made that, often these days in agency life, you have one Black or non-Black person of color in the room, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're empowered to actually talk about anything. I think, recently we've seen statistics that in police departments that are dealing with violence against Black people, you only really start to see a change, not when you begin to hire a few Black officers, but when that number hits about 35%. So if you compare that to the agency world, numbers are probably between 2 and 7% of Black professionals in agencies, which means that no matter how good any particular agency is doing right now, it's nowhere near the level that is necessary and actually, in order to actually affect the culture and allow people to feel comfortable speaking up. So a lot of really great things to think about. But that does it for this morning session. I do want to thank our sponsors, presenting sponsor Verizon Media, and our supporting sponsors, the Ad Council, the Female Quotient, It Gets Better Project, and Miami Ad School. And remember to join us at 3 p.m. this afternoon for our Young Creatives cover competition hosted by creativity editor Anne Christine Diaz and our art director, Eric.